Presumably around 1992, Kurt Cobain, titled under the band name Nirvana, made this list of his top 50 albums. I have no idea if it's ranked at all or if it's just a collection, but in this series I'm going to be reviewing and ranking every album listed. To preface this, I must add that I'm a big music fan and I've been on the internet for a while, so some of these albums I've already heard. Now I know a lot of people watch these types of videos to hear people talk about their favorite albums, so I will still be reviewing these albums, but keep in mind that the thoughts on the album will not be a first impression. For each album I will score them out of 10, list my 3 favorite songs and 1 least favorite. To keep the videos from being overly long, I've also decided to split the series into 5 parts covering 10 albums each, which will look like this. At the end of each video I will rank all the albums that have been reviewed and update the ranking for each subsequent video. Lastly, before we begin, this isn't some sort of definitive review of any of these records, just one guy's personal opinion and experience, and it's no more important than your own as like a YouTube commenter or something, so don't lose your head. Iggy Pop is truly one of the most unique figures in rock, both from a purely physical physiognomy type of standpoint and his contributions musically. He's kind of a legendary figurehead for the punk genre itself, and ever since watching Trainspotting for the first time, I've had an appreciation for his music. However, almost all of what I've heard from Iggy has been his solo material, so this was my first full listen of an album of his with the Stooges. Raw Power is their 3rd studio album as a band and has some surrounding controversy regarding the mixes. The original mix is by David Bowie, done in a single day after Iggy came in with just 3 audio tracks for the album. 1 of the band, 1 for lead guitar, and 1 for himself. After hearing the album for myself, reading this explained a lot. A later remix in 1997 by Iggy Pop was made to enhance the sound and capture a more raw energy, which apparently just meant boosting the fuck out of the volume to a point where Iggy deliberately stated that he kept the audio levels in the red intentionally. This ultimately resulting in this album being one of the consistently loudest fucking albums in existence. For the life of me, I couldn't find a consistent consensus on which of the mixes was better, so in the spirit of Kurt Cobain's list, I decided to first listen to the Bowie mix, as that would have been what was widely available at the time. And then later I listened to Iggy's mix, since its high volume and unfiltered sound seems to be what Iggy was going for, considering the title of the album and later statements. The album is divided into 2 types of tracks: fast-paced hard rock proto-punk, and slower-paced darker songs that have a larger focus on groove and atmosphere. Out of these 2, the latter were definitely my favorite. It's tough to say the faster-paced songs have aged poorly, but to my ears it sounds like Billy Idol. Take Shake Appeal for example. The riff reminds me of Devo's Whip It, and the claps on the side makes for a janky track in all the wrong ways. It's not to say that all the faster-paced tracks were to my dislike. The vocal performance and rockabilly style of Your Pretty Face are great, and the album opener Search and Destroy is also great. But to my current ears, I just don't feel the aggression enough, and sadly, I don't think the different mixes help remedy this problem. For the most part, the different mixes didn't play a major role on my favorite tracks of the album. However, I noticed that it had a greater effect on the faster paced ones. In this case, Iggy's version often being superior. No track illustrates this better than the closing track, Death Trip. I'll let you listen for yourself, but heed my warning and lower your headphones a bit for the second part. I don't know how fucking coked out of his mind Bowie was when mixing this track, but considering he mixed them all in a single day, I'm guessing he did it chronologically and just wanted to go home at this point. That's something about this album I noticed. Considering all the audio tracks were all fucked up and there was just 1 for lead guitar and 1 for the band, like the entire band itself, the lead guitar will just sometimes come in like a fucking cannon into the mix, completely obliterating everything else and just cutting into your ears. It reminds me a lot of Bob Dylan's harmonica. The slower paced songs on the album however hold up fantastic, and many of them, especially Penetration, have this great drugged out sort of sound like you're about to fall on your face while the room is spinning. I think it plays to Iggy's strength to just give him a nice dark groove behind him and just let him go crazy with ad-libs and animal screeches and whatever the fuck else he wants to do, really. His tracks feel like a precursor to later styles of music like those he would embrace on albums like The Idiot, my personal favorite album of his. Overall, this album comes out to a 7 out of 10 for me. I think while some of the album has aged rather poorly, partially due to the mixing, other parts like the slower songs still hold up great. In the intro I mentioned that some of these albums I'm already familiar with. For each of these, this could be measured in various degrees, and in that case, this album would score the highest, as this album is one of my favorite albums of all time by one of my favorite bands of all time. I think it will surprise most of you that I listened to the Pixies before listening to Nirvana, courtesy of Skate 3's soundtrack being the groundwork for my musical taste growing up. Nirvana and the Pixies would eventually completely take over my listening activity for around 2 extremely formative years, in which it was probably 90% of what I listened to. And I really think Nirvana is a great jumping off point to discover more about what kind of music you love. Unfortunately, I listen to so much Nirvana in fact that today, I can hardly bring myself to listen to them outside a few tracks and live performances. The Pixies, however, have always remained in my rotation to this day. A hugely influential indie rock band, this is their first studio album released in 1988. And much like Kurt, I would also agree that this is the best one. However, I am surprised he didn't include any of their later output on his list, as they could all certainly be argued as their best. Perhaps he agreed with producer of Surfer Rosa and founding member of Big Black Steve Albini, who stated that their later albums became a parody of themselves. Considering Albini would go on to produce Nirvana's final album, In Utero, it is plausible. But this recording of Kurt listening to Bossa Nova in his truck gives me pause. If I were to describe this album in a single word, that word would be manic. Frank Black's vocal shifts from nervy and high-key Spanglish drivel to hyper-aggressive screaming back down to cool and collected always keep the songs interesting for several listens. The rhythm section is also fantastic, with sharp, pounding drums courtesy of David Lovering, that Kurt would cite as one of his main reasons for wanting to work with Albini on In Utero. The steady bass and backup vocals by Kim Deal are full of personality and totally essential to their sound. Impressive considering 2 years earlier she had never played a bass guitar. However, I think the underrated gem of this album truly is Joey Santiago's lead guitar. He has this fantastic dissonance and uncontrollable sound of gain that makes it sound like the guitar is barely being tamed throughout the album, forced to scream out whatever he strikes. All of this combined serves to create a sound that can explode at any moment, creating this amped up paranoid energy like you just snorted 5 grams of cocaine next to a schizoid hobo who snorted 10. A personal highlight for me was the song run from Something Against You to Where Is My Mind. Something Against You's fast-paced rhythm section and absolutely blaring lead guitar cutting through everything interspersed with screaming megaphone-esque vocals create my favorite track on the album and one of my favorite songs period. Broken Face has these great start-stop moments where it just blasts the listener. And Gigantic, being the only song featuring Kim Deal on lead vocals, is a perfectly crafted indie rock song with a fantastic outro, probably being the most outwardly accessible song on the album. River Euphrates has my favorite dual vocal performance I've ever heard, and Where Is My Mind is Where Is My Mind. Speaking on the track in relation to the rest of the album, it really comes out of left field. With how manic the rest of the album is, it feels like an eye of the storm moment where the listener's head is briefly above water, acknowledging their situation before being dragged beneath the waves once again in a swirling typhoon of crashing guitars and pounding drums. The following track, however, is my least favorite on the album. Cactus on its own isn't a bad track, I'd still rate it at 7.5 out of 10, but it doesn't do as much personally for me as the others. Out of the remaining 4 songs on the album, my favorite is definitely Vamos. It really shows off the instrumental expertise of the band and features a completely insane guitar solo by Joey Santiago, which sounds more like a guitar fight. Probably the most crazy this album ever goes, before finishing off with a comparatively laid-back closer in Brick is Red. All in all, this is one of my favorite albums of all time, and I'd rate it a near perfect 9.5 out of 10. Surfer Rosa's 10th track, Oh My Golly, ends with a studio outtake that goes like this.
I said you fucking died! No. I was talking to Kim. I said you fucking died. No, we were just goofing around. No, it didn't have anything to do with anything. She said don't touch, anybody touches my stuff, and I said you fucking die, like that. I was finishing her part for her.
Frank states he was merely finishing her sentence, and he probably was, but later on this statement would maybe not seem so crazy. From the get-go of the Pixies formation, tensions arose between Frank and Kim, as she wanted more say on the band's creative direction. Frank, being the primary songwriter, didn't like this, and tensions between the two escalated after the release of their biggest album Doolittle in 1989. This tension ultimately culminating in Frank eventually throwing a guitar at Kim during a live show that same year. Not being able to reconcile amongst each other, the band decided to take a 1-year break. When they eventually reformed, Kim's involvement would steadily decrease with the following releases Bossa Nova and Trop Le Monde, eventually ending with the band breaking up for good in 1993. During that first break in 1989, however, Kim Deal would start her own band, The Breeders, who would release Pod as their first album in 1990. Now I must be honest, when I put this on for the first time to make this video, I was underwhelmed. But considering I was just possibly not in the right headspace and knowing others' appreciation of this album, including Kurt Cobain of all people, I decided to wait a couple days and then re-listen to the album whilst examining my notes from the first listen. After the second time around, I had a much more positive view on the album, though some tracks I still do not care for. Much like the Pixies' Surfer Rosa, this album is made up of mostly shorter songs, all being very alt-rock-esque with angsty riffs and varying vocal inflections by Kim. Which mostly reminds me of the other woman who was also named Kim, and also plays bass, and also plays for another alt-rock band prominent in the 80s and 90s, and was also mean to Nardwuar. Wait, no, what the fuck? This album is very consistent in its sound and quality, so if you love the first couple of tracks, then you will most likely love this whole album. In my case, I did enjoy the tracks, but nothing ever reached the heights of songs like Vamos of Surfer Rosa or Penetration of Raw Power. Though in that same vein, nothing ever reached the lows of Shake Appeal either. In that sense, I find it a little hard to speak on individual tracks from this album, but my personal highlights include Opened with its soaring guitar, Fortunately Gone and Only in Threes for their catchy and poppy melodies, and the opening track Glorious for its brooding and sinister atmosphere. Another song worth mentioning is a cover of the Lennon Beatles track Happiness is a Warm Gun, which unsurprisingly works great as a 90s alt-rock song considering the theme. The rest of the songs for me range from good to just not that interesting, but none of them were ever outright bad. All in all, this album is a 7 out of 10 for me. Pod is an extremely consistent album. If I were to compare it to Raw Power's rating, it would be that whilst Raw Power was a 7 due to a high ceiling but low floor, Pod is the opposite. I could totally see someone giving this a 9 if they were more partial than me towards this specific sound, and I definitely have to check out some later albums by them. Okay, so this one's a little strange. It's just an EP containing 4 songs, so I will keep this segment rather brief. The Vaselines are a Scottish band, mainly consisting of dual vocalists and guitarist Eugene Kelly and Francis McKee. Kurt was a massive fan. In fact, 2 of the 4 tracks on this EP have been covered by Nirvana on several occasions. Molly's Lips showing up on Incesticide, and Jesus Don't Want Me for a Sunbeam being covered during several live shows, most notably as the opener for their best live show in my opinion, Paramount 1991. And on that other one people like. Considering the small amount of content on this EP, I will go song by song on this one. The first song on here is Dying For It, which opens with some absolutely gorgeous sonic guitar which reminds me of the Stone Roses. It's a fast-paced indie punkish song, and the highlight on this song really is that guitar, which just soars throughout the track. The next song is Molly's Lips, which unlike the others featured Francis on lead vocals. It's a very simple and childlike song, not in a bad way really, it just sounds a bit like a children's tune, especially when they put clown horns in it for some reason. I must say I prefer the punkier Nirvana version, but it's a fine song that doesn't overstay its welcome. Following that is Teenage Superstar, and this one is interesting. If I put this song on without telling you the year of its release, and you had a similar childhood to mine, I imagine you would place it around the late 90s to early 2000s. Something about the way the vocal inflection and the way they're mixed in this one sounds exactly like those songs you would hear whilst playing SSX or Skate. It all sort of reminds me of that song Jerk It Out by the Caesars. Like, listen to this. The closing track is Jesus Wants Me for a Sunbeam. It's legitimately a very beautiful song with great melodies and a great vocal harmony during the chorus. I don't have that much to say on this one, except that I get why Kurt liked it so much. It's kinda tough to rate this in comparison to the others on this list, considering it's only 4 songs, but I think it comes out to an 8 out of 10 for me. It's a great set of tracks, and ranking the tracks is a bit silly, but here they are anyway. Sorry, Molly.
My pal's name is Football, he always likes to roam. My pal's name is...
So one day in 1965, presumably while smoking crack and listening to the Beatles, a father in Fremont, New Hampshire thought he could make his own Beatles using 3 nearby peons. Those being his daughters. This was based on a psychic reading years ago from the man's mother naturally. And given the history of bands manufactured by parents in the music industry, you would think this would go terrible. But luckily for us it didn't go bad in an emotional type of way.
I sleep in bed with all of them.
Just in an auditory type of way. None of the daughters knew any instruments, nor did they have any interest in learning their instruments. But the search for destiny prevails, and against better judgment, the dad decided to fully finance an album 4 years after starting the band. In 1969, the Shags, which I'm guessing is based on the haircuts and not the English slang for fucking, since that would be a strange name to give your daughter's band, released this, Philosophy of the World. And you know, it sure is a philosophy, perhaps in nihilism, absurdism, and shit-ass suckism. Now, Kurt Cobain was definitely a bit of a hipster when it comes to music, and that's gonna become apparent regarding albums like this. Typically branded under the label outsider music, it's music created with disregard towards commercial and musical norms. Which wouldn't seem out of place in regards to a lot of music on this list, but it's not really anti-commercial in a punk or artsy kind of way. It's more in a don't care or intellectual disabilities kind of way. And no, I'm not just being a dickhead, that is literally part of the definition of this genre. Now you may think I hate this album based on what I've said so far, but I honestly cannot say that. It's a strange sort of feeling. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if this was used as CIA torture music, but I kinda love it at the same time. There's something so strange about hearing them use the same shit-ass sort of dual vocal delivery with no regard for inflection or harmony at all, whilst the drummer is going absolutely nuts in the back. Then around a minute 40 each track, they will have an instrumental break, where suddenly, a glimpse of some sort of melody or musical idea will appear, only for the terrible off-key vocals to return with the detuned strummed guitar frantically trying to follow pace. Something about it gives me a sweet sort of feeling, and sometimes they will accidentally create a fucking horror movie like on My Pal Foot Foot. This is probably the most insane track on the whole album and is genuinely hilarious and terrifying at the same time. Whilst Surfer Rosa sounds manic, this album will make you feel manic, and because of that, I can't really call this album bad in an experience sort of way. I mean, it certainly is a bad experience for the most part, but it's also something completely new for me. In fact, I think everyone who is really into music needs to listen to this album at least once. For example, I can still remember the first time I heard Territorial Pissings, and it absolutely floored me, because I simply didn't realize making something this loud and crazy was possible. In a similar vein, this is also a completely new experience for me. I didn't know you could make music this bad, but I mean, most music out there is bad. But whilst that's bad in a Wings of Redemption kind of way, this is bad in a Chris Chan kind of way. I don't know if you're gonna understand that, but that's the best way I could describe it. My journey with this album is something like this. At first, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was gonna be. Then, right around the stretch of My Pal Foot Foot to I'm So Happy When You're Near, I kinda loved the album and thought it was a work of genius. But for the remaining songs after the midpoint, I started loathing the album. My head began to feel a little heavy and I had to keep standing up from my chair and walking around, as some sort of physical relief to distract myself from what I was hearing. In fact, I think my listening notes and ratings speak for themselves. The last track is fittingly called We Have a Savior, and by this point I'd honestly never want to listen to this album in one sitting again. All the songs sound the same, and after a while it all becomes horrid. Truly a unique experience. I'm glad I did it, but I don't think I'll ever do it again. I have no idea what to rate this album. On a pure effect on the listener's side, it should have a 10 out of 10, but the album is objectively horrible. Evening out my scores for the songs comes out to something like this, a 5 out of 10. And you know, I'll just trust my notes from the brief period I like this album, and those will be my top 3. If I advise you to listen to just one song from this album out of curiosity, that would have to be My Pal Foot Foot. I think that one might genuinely be a work of genius. Alright, so you know in the Reagan era of the 80s where conservative views held a firm grip on American culture and they portrayed punk music as the sort of antichrist, evil, degenerate music made for and by junkies, criminals and sex offenders? Well, this album is what I imagine they envisioned all punk music as. Landshark by Fang, released in 1983, is an underground hardcore punk album, and I really mean that. It is punk in its most bottled up little gremlin creature type of way. You know how many TV shows have that episode or plot point where you can just release all your negative energy into a foul little golem devil creature? Well, that's kinda what this album is for punk. It probably has the world record for most guitar feedback on an album, the production is complete ass for the most part, and most of the lyrics and songs are just piss takes on different parts of life and culture. Take the song Roadkills for example, which I'm pretty sure is just a parody of Motorhead. With the cherry on top being the unenthusiastic yeah at the end. Other songs on the album work as sort of concept songs. For example, Drunk and Crazy, which like its title suggests, is just a song to run around in circles to whilst trying to suplex somebody. Other songs like Fun with Acid and Suck and Fuck serve a similar purpose of being sort of theme songs for their respective vices. going so far as to feature incoherent laughter, sexual groaning, and even vomiting on the track Everybody Make Me Barf, which I think is pretty fun. That's not to say all the songs on this album are just gross or parodies for the sake of it with no deeper lyrical theme. The song GI Sex is a clear criticism of the macho saving the world attitude of certain army men, who try to use their position to leverage favors from others, all for just sitting around in a base all day. Other songs on the album though are just sort of gross for the sake of it, like the ending track which features lyrics like this, performed in some sort of growling monster voice. Alright, so upon reading more about this band later, apparently the fucking singer actually killed his girlfriend. He was a real life acid drug dealer. And at some point, I don't know, he was fucking drugged out of his mind and thought the girlfriend was like working with another acid dealer or something. So he, and I quote, crushed Carney's neck with his bare hands. He served 6 years in jail for this, by the way. What the fuck? Okay, so I guess this explains the lyrics a little bit better. I guess this guy really is just fucking completely deranged. Because after listening to the song, I was like, Jesus Christ. I mean, like, a lot of punk lyrics will be kind of disgusting, but this was like next. Like, if you listen to that last song, like, the lyrics on that one are just terrible. Like, absolutely horrible. Like, way beyond whatever, you know, whatever the fuck. So yeah, apparently this guy was a real life fucking murderer. Wish I would have knew that when I was actually writing this part for the first time, but you know, it'll work as a little interjection right here. And you know, with a massive 21 tracks on the album, most of them being just about 2 minutes long, some of the songs do get sort of overshadowed and turned into just hardcore punk noise for me. My favorite track on the album is undoubtedly the first, The Money Will Roll Right In. It wouldn't surprise me if this was also Kurt's favorite, considering Nirvana would cover the song multiple times during live shows, most notably during the Reading Festival in 1992. However, I actually think Fang's disinterested vocals fit the song better, considering the sleazy tone of the song. When they do these slower songs that let the guitar riffs breathe a little more, like the aforementioned Money and songs like An Invitation, I think that plays to the band's strengths the best. Overall, I'm a bit mixed on this album. Whilst I think some tracks like Money, An Invitation, and the aforementioned themed songs are great, I think a lot of the album is honestly pretty forgettable, which I believe stems from the sheer number of tracks and the shoddy production that doesn't lend itself well to distinguishing most of these songs. It's a 6 out of 10 for me overall, with a couple tracks scored as high as a 9, but the sheer number of the mediocre tracks on the album drag it down a lot.
Who starts all the fucking wars? The stinking rich people! The greedy and pathetic, forgetful liars! Yeah, the devil shoots on full of lies, words are hollow, death to shout, you lie to us from the 40th floor, you don't even know what death brings on.
Holy shit, this album is fucking fast. Millions of Dead Cops by MDC, which I'm guessing also stands for Millions of Dead Cops, released in 1982, is another hardcore punk album. The album in total is about 20 minutes, but it feels more like 3 minutes, like all the songs are being played at 4 times speed. After listening to Landshark by Fang, I was a little worried that most of the hardcore punk on this list, because there is a lot, wouldn't really be to my liking. But forget all that, this album is fucking amazing. I don't think I've ever heard an album this consistently fast. There's not a single track on here that doesn't eventually build up into a hurricane of fucking insane guitars, bassist absolutely shredding his fingers off, and the drummer sounding like there's 4 of him. And the vocals as well on this album are possibly the complete opposite of what was on Landshark. While Fang often went for this low-key, sort of disconnected vocal inflection, MDC is more like a slightly more held-together American Johnny Rotten on crack. Figuring out that Geza X was the guy that produced this album also explained a lot, because the similarities in sound and stylings to groups like the Dead Kennedys and Germs was obvious from the get-go. I also have to give him big props for making hardcore punk not mixed to sound like complete ass. I get it's a whole punk ethos thing to be like, nah, fuck production dude, that shit's gay. But this album is produced and mixed super well, and it fucking enhances the songs so much more because of it. I think there are definitely cases to be made for limitations in production enhancing certain albums, but sometimes I just want to listen to something where I can hear every instrument in crisp detail. Honestly, I suggest if you're watching this video right now and you haven't heard this album before or much hardcore punk in general, just go listen to this album afterwards. It's gonna take you like 2 seconds in your mind, I promise. This album fucking speeds by. As for lyrical themes on the album, I would say it's more overtly political than Landshark. Whilst that album delved into a sort of horrorcore styling, this is a bit more in your face. Take for example the track John Wayne Was a Nazi. This track is high up there for my personal favorite on the album, and the instrumental, particularly the funk bass groove at the beginning of this, is amazing. The lyrics in this one are also cold as fuck. I didn't really know much about John Wayne apart from the fact he was this boomer film icon, but apparently he said some kind of wild shit even for the time.
John Wayne once said, "I believe in white supremacy until blacks are educated to a point of responsibility." Why did you retweet that?
It's in my code.
It's in my code. Have y'all ever seen
Wreckin' Ralph?
My favorite track on the album is definitely My Family Is a Little Weird. I can't really explain why, but something about how tight and fast the band is playing on this, mixed with the insanely rapid vocal performance, just hits incredibly well for me. In fact, I loved most of this album to death, so much that if I mentioned every track that got a 10 or a 9.5, it would be half the album. Honestly, this album is just great. Kurt was definitely cooking with this one, and it's discoveries like this that was partly the reason for me wanting to do this series. Yeah, this album is fucking amazing. It's a strong 9.5 out of 10 for me. Scratch Acid's first EP released in 1984 is noise rock. Now to be honest, I always thought the term noise rock is kinda silly, considering most rock is pretty fucking loud, but from what I understand, it's just what you get when you play punk rock whilst having your distortion and tone absolutely maxed out, enough to cause tinnitus with prolonged listening. Like, if the guitar sounds more like some sort of metallic cutting machinery, then it's probably noise rock. And I think I like noise rock overall based on this description and what I've supposedly heard from the genre prior, and that would also mostly be true for this album as well. This album starts off great. The opening track, Cannibal, almost feels like the climactic finale to its Ministry counterpart. Fucking love that song. And the crashing guitars with this simple riff fits perfectly with the title. I swear every time a song's called Cannibal, it's always a good one. Following that is my favorite track on the album, Greatest Gift. The gradual build-up into the tempo change with this dark cowboy-esque guitar riffs crafts a perfect noise rock song. This EP's atmosphere very much radiates a sort of western energy, though less of a Lucky Luke and more of a Blood Meridian in that sense. Perhaps this comes from some local influences considering the band is from Austin, Texas. Probably not. I need to talk about this vocalist as well. David Yao really reminds me of another David, that being Byrne. The vocals are mostly comprised of screaming and a sort of panicked, frightened wailing. And it works great when the instrumentals back it up with fierce guitar riffs and fast-paced drums. At some point it almost reaches a black metal level, though thankfully not, cause most black metal vocals fucking suck in my opinion. The following track, Monster, opens completely insane, and its squealing guitar and rapid drumming makes it another favorite of mine. Though I wish it was a little longer. I can't say the same for the following, Owner's Lament though. I admit that this might be a personal thing, but I don't think these longer, drawn-out tracks work as well in noise rock. I want to be blasted with rapid sound, and a dragged-out noise rock song loses a bit of its punch in my experience. The next track, She Said, is another banger, with a great tempo change and cool atmosphere with these interspersed recordings in the vocals. Honestly, out of nowhere tempo changes, especially from slow to fast, might be my favorite song gimmick. Right next to when you make the guitar go, or when you make the vocals go. I love stuff like that, I don't know why. Sadly though, the EP falls off drastically after this point. The remaining 3 songs are all very samey, with my only real highlight being the ending of El Spectro, which has this great instrumental breakdown. Overall, it's a 7 out of 10 for me. Half of this EP is honestly fantastic, while the other half is just okay in my opinion. Saccharine Trust's first EP released in 1981 is post-hardcore, which means it's just a later, more experimental version of hardcore punk. Which might confuse you considering this came out in 1981 and the other hardcore punk albums I talked about came out in 1982 and 3, but it can work both ways. You can make a hardcore punk album before, whilst hardcore punk is still being... It doesn't make any fucking sense, but you get what I mean. You can make hardcore punk fucking post-hardcore whenever you want, doesn't matter. Given it's an EP, it's also a very short record, clocking in at just 16.5 minutes containing 8 songs. One of them nearly being a whole third of the LP, that being the closer at 5 minutes and 10 seconds in length. First thing I noticed with this record was the vocals. On every song they are performed slightly different in a sort of theatrical way. They'll range from a gay Jello Biafra
It was just the community line. That's why we never felt any guilt.
to a sort of ghoulish monster mash type thing,
I've seen him somewhere. The fears in heart.
to Gollum getting pegged for 2 straight minutes on the album closer. The other thing I immediately noticed is the guitar. Similar to Scratch Acid, it has this noise rock quality where sometimes it will just be straight up tinnitus, but other times they'll do really creative stuff using the sound. A highlight for me was definitely the opening track, I Have, which has this weird off-key angular quality to the guitar, which works great with the unnerving tone of the vocals. My favorite track is the 5th track, I Am Right, which has this Dead Kennedys-esque surf guitar strumming that just permeates the entire track. That pace continues with the following track, We Don't Need Freedom, which I also enjoy for many of the same reasons. The final track on the album, A Human Certainty, has a lot of interesting ideas, but similarly to how I felt on Scratch Acid, I don't think this sort of sound lends itself well to tracks as long as 5 minutes. Maybe I'm just a zoomer with completely fried synapses, but considering I would say this, Marky Moon, is possibly the greatest song ever made, I'd like to think it's just a matter of personal taste. And that's honestly all I really have to say on this EP. I'll just be honest, when I reached this album, I hit a massive writer's block. I did the other albums before and after this at a fairly quick and energetic pace, but on this one I was just completely stumped for several days. On a pure emotional engagement level, I just don't think I really connect with this album. It's just 16 minutes, so I do suggest you go listen to it for yourself if what I've said has intrigued you, but for me this is a 6 out of 10. It's not a bad project, it's just not really my thing.
There's a time to shit and a time for God. The last shit I took was pretty fucking hard.
Yes, you are reading that correctly. If you hadn't heard of them before, the next band is called the Butthole Surfers. They're actually a very prolific and hugely influential noise rock / experimental / psychedelic / art punk and whatever the fuck else really. They just kinda do whatever they feel, including playing naked on stage, having sex on stage, setting yourself on fire on stage, stalking REM, and having 2 drummers for some reason. It's no real surprise to me that these guys hit it semi-big in the 90s, considering everything was just grossed out like "Bleh."
Did you cut the cheese? No.
I've known of the Butthole Surfers for a while now, cause once you see that name, you don't really forget it. Great marketing, honestly. However, this will be the first time I actually fully listen to a project of theirs aside from certain songs I've heard here and there. I guess this is a good starting off point, considering this is their debut. Seems like Kurt favored the debut release of most artists on this list. I must say that just looking at this track list, I like the contrast of titles on display, from stuff like The Shah Sleeps in Lee Harvey's Grave and The Revenge of Anus Presley to Hey and Something. After listening to this record, I must say that these guys are pretty funny. And also talented, because honestly the instrumentals on this thing are sick. The EP opens with the aforementioned Lee Harvey song, which intersperses Dracula flow-esque lines delivered in chaotic screams between sections of complete noise terror. The following song, Hey, is definitely the most mellow on the album. I kept waiting for some bullshit to happen, but it's just a really nice, chill, experimental indie track. After that comes Something, which highlights one of my favorite things about this album. The instrumentals, and particularly the guitar, are super cool and create these weird riffs. This one in particular sounds like some sort of sinister circus theme. The next song, Barbecue Pope, is probably my favorite. It builds up until it hits a genuinely sick guitar riff that continues throughout the song. I was waiting for some bullshit to happen because this was sounding too straightforward and cool. And of course, monkey screaming and kazoo ensues. However, while it was off-putting at first, I kinda got used to it and it fits the track surprisingly well. The next song, Wichita Cathedral, has a really strange but captivating groove, interspersed with this stabbing guitar and what I can only describe as hillbilly cousin fucker vocals. After this comes probably the funniest song on the album, ironically titled Suicide. The crown jewel of this song really are the vocals, with this incredible intro.
I got a stiff upper lip because I'm half dead. The walls of my life are crumbling around me. I'm running and I can't hide, and I might try fucking suicide.
The vocals themselves are delivered in this nasal, chud-like tone that really just sells the whole concept. I fucking love this song, probably one of the funniest songs I've ever heard. The final song, Revenge of Anus Presley, is fine, but it's definitely my least favorite out of the bunch. Mostly because I feel like the other songs did a better job incorporating the instrumentation to service the theme and vocals, whilst this one just kinda sounds like just some like Godzilla theme bullshit, I don't know. Also, this EP is pretty short, but it's a great first EP. I rate it an 8 out of 10, and I'm very excited to hear the other Butthole Surfers album on this list, which I've heard is a noise rock classic. Alright, that concludes the first part of this video series, and this is my current ranking of the albums so far. As you can see, Surfer Rosa still remains at the top for me, although MDC was very close to be fair. As for the other albums, I don't really feel the need to elaborate on every single one, as I feel you can sort of gauge my ranking based on my scores and the reviews earlier in this video. If I divulged every single ranking on this list, then by the 5th video, then it would be like the fucking longest part of the video, so I can't be doing that. I'll say one thing. I'm very interested to see how the ranking of the Shags develops throughout this series, because it's honestly a super hard album to rank. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops against the future albums I'll be reviewing. Speaking of that, in the next video I'll be reviewing these albums, so be on the lookout for that, and thanks for watching my video. Goodbye.